view that this Parliament has run its course. And that is because I simply do not believe that this House is capable of delivering on the priorities of the people, whether that means Brexit or anything else. And of course, I would rather get Brexit done, Mr. Speaker. I would rather get Brexit done first. And I share the blazing urgency of many colleagues across the House. And indeed, last Tuesday, we briefly allowed hope to bloom in our hearts, Mr. Speaker, when for the first time in 3.5 years, Parliament voted for a deal to take this country out of the EU. And I repeat my admiration for the way MPs came together across the House to do that. And in many ways, it was an astonishing moment. They said we would never reopen the withdrawal agreement. They said that we would never be able to get rid of the backstop. They said we would never do a new deal with the EU. We did all of them, Mr. Speaker. They said we would never get Parliament to agree. And I give way to my right honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend and all he's doing to get Brexit done. Could I ask him, in his preparations for a no-deal Brexit, can he make sure there's plenty of corn feed for the election chickens on the opposite benches?
I could, Mr. Speaker, elegantly put, Mr. Speaker. Our thanks to the work of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, our preparations for no-deal Brexit are very thorough indeed. But alas, we have not been able, as I say, to get Parliament to agree. There was a tantalising moment, as I say, when I thought that Parliament was going to do the sensible thing, Mr. Speaker. And then this House threw out the programme motion at the urgings of the opposition, at the final hurdle, as they intended all along. They made it inevitable that the people of this country would be retained in the EU against their will for at least another 3 months at a cost of another £1 billion a month. But I hear cries opposite to bring the bill back, Mr. Speaker, and I've offered that, and I continue to offer it. I wanted, and I still want so badly, to accommodate this House, that we on these benches have compromised. Yep. And last week I wrote to the right honourable gentleman, offering him more time for debate, days more in committee, days more in the Lords, the ability to sit round the clock if necessary, all the last weekend, with only one condition, that he would agree to do what all leaders of the opposition are meant to yearn and crave and campaign for, and that is have a general election on December the 12th. And I offered him that chance, and Mr. Speaker, I offer it again today.
He's not listening, though.
He turned us down on Thursday and Friday. I offered him again today.
You have time to think about it.
To use all the hours God gives to scrutinise this bill, provided that scrutiny concludes in time for an election on December the 12th. And let us be clear, that is enough time, Mr. Speaker, to scrutinise this bill. It was a remarkable feature of the debate last week on the New Deal that not only were there no new ideas in that debate, but the opposition actually ran out of speakers in the debate. They want more time. They ran out of speakers. And the people of this country can see the reality. They aren't interested in scrutinising Brexit. They aren't interested in debating Brexit. They just want to delay Brexit and to cancel Brexit. And if this House is to convince the country, that it is really serious about getting Brexit done, there must be a fixed term to this debate, a parliamentary terminus, a hard stop, Mr. Speaker, that everybody can believe in. I give way with pleasure to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. To make this matter easy for those of us on this bench, could the Prime Minister confirm to the House that if he is successful and he achieves a general election, will he be putting and seeking a mandate on the basis of the withdrawal agreement that this House voted for last week, or will he be seeking to change that withdrawal agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House that we have an excellent deal, a great deal for the whole of the UK, and we will be campaigning on the basis of that deal. And if the honourable gentleman wants more time to debate that deal and to scrutinise, as I take it by his question that he does, then, as I say, he can. But we must have December the 12th as a hard stop, a parliamentary terminus that everybody can believe in. And an election fulfills exactly that purpose, to allow a new parliament and a new government to be in place by Christmas. Because, Mr. Speaker, without that hard stop of an election, without that moment of truth, the electorate will, I'm afraid, have a sense that we're all like Charlie Brown, endlessly running up to kick the ball, only to have Parliament take it away, whisk that ball away yet again, only to find that Parliament is willing to go on delaying and delaying to January, to the end of January, to February and beyond. And the frustration will go on, Mr. Speaker. The anxiety will go on. And the angst and uncertainty that is felt by millions of people and businesses across the country will be unnecessarily and unfairly prolonged and exacerbated. That's the reality of what the opposition's course condemns this country to. And if I'm wrong, then the remedy is very simple, Mr. Speaker. The opposition, the right honourable gentleman, and all his cohorts on the front bench, they can vote for this motion tonight. They can vote for this motion tonight, bring it back, let's get Brexit done, and then let's make our cases. Let's go our separate ways and make our cases to the country to reboot our politics in the way that our people want. But if the Leader of the Opposition does not wish to take that opportunity, we must, if he wants simply to delay Brexit, if he wants to frustrate yet again the democratic will of 17.4 million people and frustrate democracy in this country, then I'm afraid we must have an election. We must have an election now. We cannot continue with this endless delay. And I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but I think the Leader of the Opposition has now run out of excuses for running away from it. First, he said of the Benn Act, and I quote, he said, "Let this bill pass and gain royal assent, and then we will back an election." The bill passed and gained royal assent, but he still shrank from an encounter with the voters. Then he said we would wait until the act had been complied with. The letter was sent over a week ago, not my letter, of course, but Parliament's letter, and he's still coming up with ever more ludicrous excuses for hiding from the British people. Now he says we've got to take no deal off the table at the end of the transition period in December 2020. Let me repeat for that. He wants to take no deal off the table at the end of the transition period in December 2020. And of course, I think his so-called anxieties are absurd, because I'm confident that we'll negotiate a fantastic new trade. Well, if you'll vote for this motion, we'll bring it back, Mr. Speaker. I'm confident that we'll negotiate a fantastic new trade deal that will bring thousands of new jobs to businesses and communities across this country. But even if he disagrees, would it not make sense, according even to his own logic, for him to agree to an election now, so that he can have the opportunity to take no deal off the table himself? Isn't that the logic of his position? Mr. Speaker, he can run, but he cannot hide forever. Across Parliament, his supposed allies are deserting, and the SNP, I now read, are in favour of an election. The Lib Dems are in favour of an election. What an incredible state of affairs, Mr. Speaker, that there is one party tonight that is actually against a general election. There is one party that does not trust the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, and that is the principal party of opposition. Mr. Speaker, I hope he accepts tonight that he is snookered and that this charade has gone on for long enough, and that he will agree to allow Brexit to get done and then allow us to make our cases to the people. And when that election comes, the people of this country will have to make a choice between a government that delivers, a government that not only got a great Brexit deal when they said it was impossible, but which is also putting 20,000 more police on the streets, delivering the biggest hospital building programme in a generation, investing £14 billion more in our schools, in levelling up education funding across the country, a great one-nation Conservative government, which is what we represent, and a Labour opposition, Mr. Speaker, that would turn the year 2020 into a toxic, tedious torture of 2 more referendums, one on the EU and one on Scotland. That is the choice, Mr. Speaker. And it is frankly time for the Leader of the Opposition to move his rusty Trabant from the yellow box junction where it is currently blocking progress. And it's time for us to get Brexit done by December the 12th and then go to the people. Because it is now overwhelmingly clear, that the only way to get Brexit done is to go to the people of this country. And I believe that it is time that we all, each and every one of us in this House, had the courage, finally, to face our ultimate bosses, the people of this country. And I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who cannot be trusted. Having illegally prorogued Parliament for 5 weeks for his Queen's speech, he now abandons that Queen's speech. He got his deals through a second reading, then abandoned it. He promised us a budget on the 6th of November, and then he abandoned that too. He said that he would never ask for an extension, and he said he'd rather die in a ditch. Another broken promise. Mr. Speaker, every promise this Prime Minister makes, he abandons. He said he would take us out of the European Union by the 31st.
Order. Let's have some measure of decorum in the debate. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he said he would take us out of the European Union by the 31st of October, do or die. He spent £100 million, Mr. Speaker, £100 million on an advertising campaign to leave on the 31st of October, but failed to deliver. This is serious, Mr. Speaker. It failed to resonate. I ask the Prime Minister, I ask this House, with that £100 million, how many nurses could have been hired? How many parcels could have been funded at food banks? How many social care packages could have been funded for our elderly? He has failed because he has chosen to fail, and he now seeks to blame Parliament. £100 million of misspent public money. At the weekend, Mr. Speaker, we learned from the former Chancellor that his deal was offered to the former Prime Minister 18 months ago, and she rejected it as not good enough for the United Kingdom. So, we have a rejected and recycled deal that has been misrepresented by ministers in this House, no doubt inadvertently. The Prime Minister said in terms there would be no checks on goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Brexit Secretary himself has confirmed that there will be. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made promises to Labour members about workers' rights. I remember him with all with all the concentration he could muster, saying that workers' rights would be protected by him. The leak to the Financial Times on Saturday shows these promises simply cannot be trusted. He says the NHS, Mr. Speaker, he says the NHS is off the table for any trade deal. Yet, a majority of the British public don't trust him. And why should they? Why should they, Mr. Speaker? Thanks to a Channel 4 dispatches programme, this is actually quite an important point the Prime Minister might care to listen to. I'll go through it again. Thanks to...
Order. The right honourable gentleman is entirely at liberty to do so. If there are people trying to shout the Leader of the Opposition down, stop it.
Yeah.
It's deeply low grade. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, thanks to a Channel 4 dispatches programme, we learn that secret meetings have taken place between... The member opposite may find this funny, but actually it's quite serious for our National Health Service. We learn, Mr. Speaker, that secret...
Sorry, point of order, Michael Fabricant.
I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the enunciators may not have been working in the offices of Labour MPs because most of them have not chosen to turn up today. Can that be investigated?
It doesn't need to be investigated at all. Unfortunately, it's not even a very good try, as the smile on the face of the honourable gentleman readily testifies. It's a very substandard attempt at a bogus point of order. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because I think this section is very important, I'll go through it again. The Channel 4 dispatches programme has told us that we learn secret meetings have taken place between government officials of the UK government and representatives of US pharmaceutical firms, where the price of National Health Service drugs has been discussed. Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister who will say anything, do anything to get his way. He will avoid his responsibilities. He will avoid his responsibilities, break his promises to dodge scrutiny. And today he wants an election and his bill. Well, not with our endorsement. He says he wants an election on the 12th of December, though how can we trust him? How can we trust him that he will stick to that date? When we do not yet have legal confirmation of the extension. The Prime Minister has not formally accepted, and the other 27 have not confirmed following that acceptance. The reason I'm so cautious is quite simply I do not trust the Prime Minister. A 12th...
Order. I don't know whether the Prime Minister was seeking to intervene.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Gentleman Leader of the Opposition is mistaken. As I always said, this government obeys the law. We comply with the law, and that has taken its course. Parliament asked for this delay. Now it's up to him to go to the country in a general election. That's what he should do.
That's not a matter for the avoidance of doubt. Such matters are not matters for the chair, but the Prime Minister's made his own point, apparently to his own satisfaction. The Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, I simply say this to the Prime Minister. If he always obeys the law, why was he found guilty by the Supreme Court?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of...
Order. No, I don't care how long it takes. Order. I'm not having the honourable gentleman shouted down and prevented from being heard. That will not work. End of subject. Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of trust, which my right friend is quite rightly pointing out, is he aware of the very interesting rumours that have reached my ear that the Prime Minister might, for example, not be planning to even stand in his own constituency at an upcoming general election, and instead apparently has lined up Sevenoaks or East Yorkshire? I wonder if he's heard that rumour.
I'm grateful to my friend for his intervention. I would put nothing past the Prime Minister. All I do know is we have an excellent Labour candidate in Uxbridge.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. And like my honourable friend said a moment ago, I don't trust the Prime Minister either, but there is a deeper issue about whether we can trust the Prime Minister with our safety. Let me just read this to you very briefly. Analysis from the Financial Times today. The Prime Minister could shake his head, but perhaps he would care to listen.
Go on, Paula.
So, when Johnson responded, I have never heard such humbug.
Order. Invite the honourable lady to resume her seat. The honourable lady has a right to be heard, not to be shouted down by front benchers or back, and she won't be. Paula Sheriff.
Thank you. When Johnson responded, I have never heard such humbug in all my life, Labour MP Paula Sheriff began to receive toxic tweets at a rate of more than 100 an hour. One such tweet from that evening read, "Tough shit, Mrs Shrek. A surrender bill or surrender act is exactly what Ben's treacherous act is." Another read, "Do what the people told you to effing do. Otherwise, yes, expect to be strung up metaphorically or physically." The Prime Minister has never apologised for saying what he said that evening, so how can we trust him that we can be safe?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend for her intervention and for the stoic way in which she's dealt with the most appalling abuse that's been thrown at her. The threats that she's received, the threats that other colleagues have received, the damage that's been done to MPs' offices, and the abusive language that has happened in so many parts of this country. And I will be happy to give away to the Prime Minister now if he wants to get up and apologise to my friend for what he said about her during that debate. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has an opportunity to apologise for the language he used. He seems unable to do so. The treatment she received was disgusting by any standards. And I would also point out that numbers of...
I'll happily apologise if the Shadow Chancellor would, for instance, apologise for inviting the population to lynch the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
Well, sorry seems to be the hardest word, doesn't it? Mr. Speaker.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that we have a Prime Minister that has a tortuous and difficult relationship with veracity, and therefore he's absolutely right not to believe a single word that comes out of that man's mouth?
I thank my friend for that intervention, and she is right. That is why many of us are very cautious at believing anything the Prime Minister said. We want it tied down before we agree to anything. The 12th of December election is less than a fortnight before Christmas, 9 days before the shortest day of the year. I'll come to you one second. The House must consider that in parts of this country it will be dark before 4 p.m. Many students will have just finished their term and gone home for Christmas. Well, actually, people having the right to vote is what an election is all about. And they risk being disenfranchised.
I thank him for giving way. If we go back to workers' rights, and he correctly says the Prime Minister can't be trusted in workers' rights. So can you explain why he'd backbench Labour MPs who said they secured workers' right concessions of the Prime Minister, why 19 of his MPs actually backed the withdrawal agreement, and if the Prime Minister is so incompetent, is there any point where he's not going to keep him in power?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claimed he would defend workers' rights. All the information in the Financial Times at the weekend suggests that he will not do that at all. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, about students and their opportunity to vote on the dates in question, the latter point may not be the case on the 9th of December, and we will consider carefully any legislation proposed that locks in the date. The theme of this is we don't trust the Prime Minister. We want something that definitely and definitively takes no deal off the table and ensures that the voting rights of all of our citizens are protected. One giveaway.
I'm very grateful to the Leader of the Opposition. If we take him at his word that this is the most untrustworthy government and Prime Minister, wedded to doing the most evil and disastrous things to this country, can he explain to me his reticence for a general election where he has the chance to sweep us out of office?
We have said all along we want no deal off the table. And since there is so little trust in this Prime Minister, we will agree to nothing until it's clear and concrete exactly what is being proposed. And so, Mr. Speaker, we agree that an early election is necessary, but also seek good reason since no general election has been held in December since 1923. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a bill to deliver. He has a budget to present. He has a Queen's speech, which he himself told us was vital. He should, for once in his life, stick to his word and deliver. He says in his misogynistic way that people should man up. A bit rich for a Prime Minister who at every turn refuses to face up to his responsibilities and serially breaks his promises.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he also agree with me that the timing of this proposed general election, not whether we have a general election, is yet another example of the art of voter suppression, ensuring students are less likely to have a vote, older people less likely to go out and vote, people with disabilities less likely to go out and vote. If the Prime Minister truly believed in democracy, wouldn't he hold the election when people were able to go and cast their vote?
Mr. Speaker, when no deal is off the table, when the date for an election can be fixed in law, and when we can ensure students are not being disenfranchised, we will back an election so this country can get the government it needs. One that will end the underfunding of our public services. One will end the privatisation of our services. One that will tackle the grotesque poverty and inequality in our country created by this government and the government before it, and recognises the seriousness of the climate emergency, and one that will rebuild an economy that doesn't just work for the privileged few, as it all the Tory party knows about, but will build a society that ends inequality and injustice and really does give the next generation real hope and real opportunities of the kind of country and kind of world that they can live in.
Mr. Speaker, this Parliament is once again misjudging the mood of the public. We were elected here to do serious things on behalf of our public. Conservative and Labour MPs alike were elected to see Brexit through. 3 years, 4 months later, there's no sign of that. And instead, we have this discordant, argumentative Parliament that will do nothing. It will not throw a government out of office, and it will not allow a government to govern. We owe it to the British people either to allow our government to govern or to let the British people decide on a better group of MPs who can form a government and can do positive things for our country. I give way.
Every constituency in my region at the 2016 referendum voted by a huge margin to leave the European Union. And at that time, lots of constituents said to me in some of the most deprived communities of this country that they didn't trust this Parliament to deliver it. They said, we won't get it. They'll never let us leave. Well, isn't the truth of it that the 5 Conservative MPs out of 10 in my region, of the 10 total MPs, might have voted to deliver Brexit, but it is really clear that the Labour MPs, bar 1 or 2 examples across my region, are never going to vote to leave the European Union, proving, sadly, right my constituents who said they'll never let us leave.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right, but it is now about more than Brexit. It is about confidence in our parliamentary system to deliver orderly government that can do things for the people, or to allow the public to decide who should be a better government because the House has no confidence in the government. This Parliament needs to put through a budget quite soon. Our economy needs a boost, and we need to know whether we can have the tax cuts as well as the spending increases. But I suspect the government fears to bring a budget to this House because it thinks there will be no cooperation, because it does not have a majority, and this Parliament will not allow a majority. This government has recently brought a Queen's speech to the House. It shows a number of good measures which I do not think were ideological or conservative provocations to socialists and those of a more left-wing nature. They were chosen to build some consensus and address the issues that worry people. But I think, again, the government rightly fears that any one of those issues, if introduced, would probably meet with resistance and a lack of cooperation in exactly the way we have been experiencing for all these other measures. But above all, Mr. Speaker, this House needs to think what message it is sending to all our partners, friends, allies, countries around the world, the businesses our business do business with, all those contacts we have in the globe. And they see this as a great beacon of democracy, a country of great experience in the art of democratic government, a country which has often led the world in putting forward those freedoms and showing how they can be for the better lives of those who are governed by them. And instead, we are sending out a message that we don't know what we're doing. We can never agree about anything, that all we can do is have endless rows in this place for the entertainment, perhaps, of people here, but for the denigration of our country, the undermining of its position. How can a government conduct international negotiations when everything it proposes is undermined or voted against by the opposition because we do not have a majority? And above all, Mr. Speaker, how can we get to the point where this House decides it's good legislation to say that the Prime Minister has to break his promises, and that they've turned that demand that he breaks his promises into something that this House calls an act of Parliament? No wonder we look ridiculous. No longer we cannot resolve Brexit. No wonder we cannot have a budget to promote our economy. No wonder we cannot govern with aplomb in the interest of the British people. If this House cannot do better, then I think the Prime Minister is right, that it must dissolve and ask the people to choose a better Parliament. Either we need to be a better Parliament, or they need to choose a better Parliament as soon as possible.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the European Union for granting the extension that this Parliament asked for under the Benn Act. We are not leaving Europe on the 31st of October, as the Prime Minister told the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom that we would be doing. The Conservative Party and the Prime Minister defeated, Mr. Speaker, once again. Mr. Speaker, a general election on the terms offered by the Prime Minister are not and will not ever be acceptable to the Scottish National Party. But, Mr. Speaker, doing nothing is not an option. The impasse cannot remain forever. We in these benches do want an election, but not with the hand that the Prime Minister is delivering. Because, let's be clear, what the Prime Minister promises. He proposes to bring back his bad withdrawal deal. He knows that some Labour MPs will help him pass that bill. And then he would have us leave the European Union at the end of November before a general election. For Scotland, that would mean we'd been taken out of the European Union against our will. We will never vote for such a proposition. It would give the Prime Minister a post-Brexit election. And that is simply something that we will not sign up to.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, myself and the leader of the Liberal Democrats wrote to Donald Tusk seeking a meaningful extension to Article 50 that would remove the risk of no deal and give us time. The continuation of the flextension, where the UK can leave at the end of any month in which it passes the motion, is not the complete safety and security we want, but demonstrates precisely why, if we enable this motion to pass, we will be out before the Prime Minister's election. We cannot allow the Prime Minister to railroad through this disastrous so-called deal. A deal that opens the door to a hard Brexit with us outside the single market and outside the customs union. A deal that would end freedom of movement, seeing Scotland's working population decline. That's what the Conservatives offer to the people of Scotland. The people of Scotland have made it very clear, because we voted 62% to remain in the European Union. Mr. Speaker, where is the respect to the people of Scotland and to our Parliament? A deal, after all, that leaves Scotland at a disadvantage to Northern Ireland. A deal that will not have the consent of the Scottish Parliament. And let me tell the Prime Minister that that consent is required, despite what he said at Prime Minister's questions last week. And he must respect that must be respect towards the Scottish Parliament. A deal, of course, that would cost each person in Scotland the equivalent of £1,600 compared with EU membership, and even more if no trade agreement can be reached. So today, SNP MPs will not be supporting the Prime Minister in his motion. We will not be bullied by this Prime Minister. We will not play his games. And we know what he doesn't want. He doesn't want to face the electorate, having missed his October the 31st deadline. He has not delivered Brexit, and the people know that the Prime Minister has failed. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it is time for the Prime Minister to look for the nearest ditch. So we will support the Liberal Democrat proposal for an election before Brexit can happen, with no reintroduction of the withdrawal agreement bill. Because given the way that some Labour MPs voted, we cannot trust Labour to block the bill in future. It's not an issue of 3 days between election dates. It's an issue of whether we are in the European Union or out of it. That is fundamental. We are ready for an election, but it must be on those terms, not ever on the Prime Minister's terms. And, Mr. Speaker, in that election, we want to see votes for 16 and 17-year-olds and for EU nationals. And when the election comes, we will fight the Tories on Brexit, on the rate clause, on austerity, on the harm they have done to people's lives, on their livelihoods, and yes, we will fight them on the right of Scotland to choose our own future rather than being dragged through this Westminster mess ever again.
I'm very grateful to the leader of the SNP for giving way. Does that mean that if the Prime Minister were to introduce a bill tomorrow, for example, a one-line bill in order to engineer a general election, that, after what he said, that he would not be supporting that proposition?
What I would say to the Labour Party, that the Liberal Democrats and ourselves have put forward a bill that leaves us in control of the process, that allows us to set the date for the election. And I appeal to Labour MPs to come with us, because this is about leadership, Mr. Speaker. It is about the opposition parties coming together and taking the keys of number 10 Downing Street away from a Prime Minister that we can't trust. So my message to the Labour Party is, let's face an election. Let's do it on our terms. Let's make sure that we take the Prime Minister and his toxic Tory government out of office. We can do it. We can do it if the opposition unite together, and we can stop the deal that the Prime Minister wants to drive through. It's in the hands of the Labour Party to join us and the Liberal Democrats, to have courage, to stand up against the Prime Minister. But what are we going to find? We find that the Labour Party want to sit on their hands. Sit on their hands, Mr Speaker, and wait for this government to deliver a Brexit. I say to the Labour Party, don't be the handmaidens of the Prime Minister's Brexit. Let's put this back to the people now by coming together. You know, it used to be said, it was said by Oliver Brown, a well-known Scottish nationalist, that a shiver ran along the Labour front bench looking for a spine to crawl up. Well, Mr Speaker, the shiver's still looking for that spine. Mr Speaker, the Scottish National Party are standing up for Scotland, standing up against Brexit and this Tory government. The Scottish National Party has fought tirelessly alongside others in this House to prevent Brexit, to secure the right to revoke Article 50, to stop no deal and to limit the damage. We have delivered the votes day in and day out, but we have to be realistic and we have to be honest with the public. We have repeatedly voted for a referendum with Remain on the ballot paper, but regrettably there is no evidence that the majority exists in this House for a people's vote. And the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor are acutely aware that if the bill comes back, that some of their MPs will back it, that the bill will become law and Brexit will happen. So the question for the Labour Party is, can they get their act together? Do they actually want to stop this Prime Minister? Do they want to stop Brexit? Or do they agree that it should be imposed on Scotland against our will? Doing nothing means that this Prime Minister stays in power. It means he gets Brexit done on his terms, in his party's interests, not on all our national interests. I will give way.
I'm supremely grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I just want to go back to clarify something he said earlier. He talked about his link-up with the Liberal Democrats, about wanting to have an election at a different date in December, and then he went on to say that that would be conditional on 16-year-olds being on the ballot paper and European Union citizens. Can I just ask him this simple question? If there is no time to put them on, does he still back the idea of an election in early December?
I would simply say, Mr Speaker, it is the right thing to do, that our young people have a right to have a say on their future, as it is for EU nationals. That is the principal position that we have long taken, and I'm proud that my colleagues in government in Scotland have made sure, when it comes to our Scottish election, that our young people and our EU citizens are given their rights. Now, we want to see this happen here, but I understand the circumstances that we're in, that we need to make sure that an election happens on our terms. That is the priority. It is the priority that we make sure that we legislate in future, that our young people, that our EU nationals are given due respect. But the priority that we face in the short term is to make sure that we come together, that we can stop this damaging Brexit that the Prime Minister wants to put through. I'll give one last time, I'll give way, then
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I listened carefully to what he said about 16 and 17-year-olds. I certainly would be bringing an amendment to any bill like that, and I was very interested to hear what he said, because that's what we now have the pleasure of having in Wales. He also mentioned EU voters, but would he also agree there's an issue with overseas voters, many of whom were excluded in previous elections, and also, of course, crucial issues around spending on advertising on social media that would need to be addressed before we could be clear that any election could go forward in a safe and democratic way?
The honourable gentleman is raising issues which have been aired in this House, which he knows that we support him on. But the fact of the matter is that we are in a constitutional crisis. And I ask this House to reflect on one thing. We've been granted an extension by the European Union till the end of January. It is emboldened on all of us that we have got to end this crisis. Time is of the essence, and if we act now in all our national interests, without playing the games that the Conservatives want to, we can have that election. We can put it back to the people, and I certainly want the people in Scotland to have their say on that. And crucially, Mr. Speaker, to recognise that if we want to protect our interests in Scotland, that it does mean that we should not and cannot be ripped out of the European Union against our will. And, Mr. Speaker, that means that Scotland has to complete that journey that we began with devolution 20 years ago and become an independent member of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the SNP... Well, there we are. There's the message to the people of Scotland. Sit down and shut up. That's what we get from the Conservatives. That was absolutely loud and clear, and it comes over time and time again. I will say to you this, that people at home are watching this. They can see the disrespect that's shown. And the day for this union comes to an end is fast approaching, Mr. Speaker. The SNP will never, not ever, vote for Brexit. We cannot and will not trust this Prime Minister. The Scottish National Party does not want to leave this Prime Minister with time in Parliament to do anything other than dissolve it. So we will not vote with the government tonight. But make no mistake, the Scottish National Party are ready to give people back their say, to stop this Tory government, to stop Brexit, and to demand the right to choose Scotland's future as an independent country. Mr. Speaker, our destiny.
William Cash. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation is very simple. The bottom line is this, that the Labour Party is scared...
The honourable gentleman, the member for Stone, the chair of the European Scrutiny Committee, a member who served without interruption in this House for the last 35 years, must and will be heard. Sir William Cash.
As I said, the real question, the bottom line is this. I heard the right honourable gentleman just now talking about disrespect. I heard the Leader of the Opposition talking about trust. What those who are either abstaining or voting against this motion are doing is utterly disrespectful to their own constituents, is utterly disrespectful to our democratic system. They are not trusting the people. They are not removing the uncertainty. They are not allowing the British people the democratic right that they have to choose the members of Parliament in individual constituencies that they wish to elect. That is a denial of democracy. That is what the Leader of the Opposition and the right honourable gentleman who's just spoken are doing. It is completely and totally unacceptable, whether they are Remainers or whether they are Leavers. The democratic right of the British people is to have a general election in the situation that we are in now. Yes, certainly we should be supporting leaving the European Union, but for those who are Remainers, they too have the right to vote, and that is being denied to them by the Leader of the Opposition and by every single Labour Member of Parliament and others who are either abstaining or who are voting against this motion today. It is a total denial of democracy. And when it comes to the general election, I trust that the people who know why they've been denied it vote against those members of Parliament to make sure that they themselves see the damage that they've done to our democratic system.
Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. I appreciate that there are different views on different sides of the House on that matter, but I hope people will appreciate that at least the Liberal Democrats have been consistent on wanting to stop Brexit throughout this process. Now, we believe... I will make some progress and I will give way. We believe the best way to do this is to put a specific Brexit deal to the public for a final say in a people's vote. We have been leading the campaign for a people's vote for 3.5 years. We stood in the 2017 election in a manifesto that argued for a people's vote. And 17 times in this House we have laid amendments for a people's vote, including last week an amendment to the Queen's speech. And the opposition, the official opposition, have refused to back wholeheartedly a people's vote. And in fact, 19 Labour MPs voted for the Prime Minister's deal last week. So when it comes to the cause of remaining in the EU and of stopping Brexit, the Labour Party have not delivered. We have put our best efforts in, but so far the House has not yet backed those in sufficient numbers.
Would you give way?
I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful. Actually, not all of our MPs have always been so unequivocal on this, because the Honourable Member for Streatham voted in favour of Article 50, although he never tells the House that, when I voted against it. But can I just ask her why she believes using an electoral system which her party, and indeed I have, her party has always thought does not deliver a fair result, i.e. through a general election, to solve this issue, rather than sticking to the point that we should be seeking a referendum on this issue. Otherwise, she could end up delivering a hard Brexit on only 38% of the vote, not 51% of the vote.
Well, I will always welcome any converts to the cause of electoral reform, or indeed long-standing supporters. This is an issue where we are looking for the best way to protect our constituents and to protect our place in the European Union. But MPs should not kid themselves that by hanging on that there is somehow going to be a different outcome. Because the reality, I'm responding to the previous question, because the reality of the situation is this. We have secured an extension to Article 50 to the 31st of January. It was not automatic, it was not guaranteed, and it was not given by return of email. It was deliberated over, it was agonised over by our EU friends, and certain members of the EU were pushing very hard for there to be a very short extension of Article 50, and they said very clearly that there needed to be a clear purpose for Article 50. So if the House of Commons can make it clear that the purpose would be to have a people's vote, I would be delighted. We have been campaigning for this for 3.5 years, and this afternoon I have tabled at the table office an early day motion calling again for a people's vote. So if MPs really want to demonstrate that the numbers are now there, go to the table office and sign it. But don't give me wishful thinking that the numbers are there when the real risk is we could crash out on the 31st of January instead of the 31st of October, and that is no better. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. If the election goes ahead and she is successful in stopping Brexit, would she share government with the Leader of the Opposition? Because I don't see how else it would work.
I've been very clear that I do not believe the Leader of the Opposition or the Prime Minister are the right people to be in our government and to be leading the country. I've been very clear about that, and I'll be crystal clear about that. And in a general election, I will go to the country and make my case that we should have a Liberal Democrat government. And a Liberal Democrat government would revoke Article 50 on day one, and that is the best way to stop Brexit. We need to see the path forward, and if it is not going to be through a people's vote, if there is not the support for a people's vote in this Parliament, then we need to look at the other way to do that. And right now, that is through having a general election. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to the honourable lady for giving way. The honourable lady knows that I was a founding member of the People's Vote, and she knows the cost that I and many others have paid for our belief at a time when it was certainly not popular and fashionable to say that. But she also knows, because of the meetings that she's attended, that there is no doubt that across this House there is a majority at the right moment for that confirmatory referendum. And does she agree with me that, well, the honourable gentleman who hasn't attended those meetings obviously hasn't been informed, but would she not now understand and consider that the best way forward now is to allow that process to continue, because it is obvious that that moment is coming when there will finally be that majority for a people's vote, and that she's preempting that, and nobody needs to be told, especially not me and others who've been so courageous and brave, and I pay tribute to them. This is not the time for a general election, but it is the time for a people's vote, and it's within our grasp.
My right honourable friend and I have worked together well on the People's Vote campaign, and I pay tribute to the courageous decision that she took earlier this year to leave her party and the work that she has done in this campaign. But I say to her, I dearly wish it were the case that we were at a majority situation for a people's vote. And if we are, then MPs can sign the motion and demonstrate that that is the case. And perhaps the right honourable lady would make an exception for this particular EDM. But in the absence of that support being clearly demonstrated, then we have to act. We cannot just wait, because my fear is that either the government pushes ahead with their withdrawal bill and it is delivered and delivers Brexit on the back of Labour votes, or that we end up in January, a couple of weeks away from the deadline of crashing out without a deal, and find ourselves in the same precarious position. But that time the EU say, I'm sorry, we've extended again, and we cannot keep doing so if you do not find a path to resolve this. And that is why, in the absence of those numbers, I want to make some progress, in the absence of those numbers for a people's vote, the way forward now is to have an election. But to do so responsibly, not letting the Prime Minister force through his bad Brexit deal in a small number of days without proper scrutiny, which is what his plan is and why we will not support his motion tonight, because we know that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal would be bad for workers' rights, bad for environmental protections, bad for the economy, bad for jobs, bad for our public services, bad for our security, and bad for our United Kingdom. And it should not be left up to them to have carte blanche to set the date of the election after the House of Commons has dissolved, because we cannot trust what the Prime Minister says. I'm making some progress. We cannot trust what the Prime Minister says, and we would have no guarantee that he would not be trying to crash us out of the European Union. He said he wouldn't prorogue Parliament. He did. He said he wouldn't send a letter to request an extension of Article 50, and he did. So we cannot trust what the Prime Minister says. That is why the plan that we have put forward with the Scottish National Party for a general election on the 9th of December is a plan where we have no deal taken off the table with the extension to Article 50. We have no withdrawal agreement bill, and there is no wriggle room for the Prime Minister on the date. And we have worked together on a cross-party basis, and we don't agree on everything, but we do agree we want to stop Brexit, and we have worked together, and that has been important, because the European Union had not granted that extension on Friday when they said they might. And our EU friends tell us that the letter and the bill that were published were instrumental in making sure they were able to grant that extension. I'll give way to my honourable...
I thank the right honourable lady for giving way, and she set out three conditions which I noted very clearly. The leader of the SNP pointed out the issue about 16 and 17-year-olds getting the vote in such a situation, also EU electors, overseas voters, and a number of other issues. Does she support efforts to ensure that those things were attached to any election? And would she support a bill that didn't guarantee that those rights to vote were respected and available?
Well, I thank, and I do count him as a friend, my honourable friend, for that intervention, and we have also worked together well on the People's Vote campaign, and I welcome the cross-party nature of that work. I have campaigned for votes at 16 from the moment that I came into this House. We have votes at 16 for most elections in Scotland. It works well. The sky hasn't fallen in, and I think that those should be introduced for elections across the House and across all different elections. But what I would say to my honourable friend is that the worst thing we could do for 16 and 17-year-olds is to crash out and to leave the European Union. And we are in a situation where there is no guarantee of an extension beyond the 31st of January. And we need to do everything we can to stop Brexit. And if that means an election to stop Brexit, to protect the rights of those 16 and 17-year-olds, we need to deliver that. Because leaving the European Union is the thing that will wreck the future of young people. I've given away plenty of times. The Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition say that they want a general election. If that is the case, and they are not just playing games, then the government will give time for the bill that we have published, and the Leader of the Opposition will ask his MPs to support it. And I relish the opportunity to take both of them on in a general election and share with the country the Liberal Democrat positive vision to stop Brexit and build a brighter future.
Steve Double. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to make a short contribution to this very important debate. I will be supporting the motion tonight because it's absolutely clear to me that the only way out of this current situation is a general election. This House is in stalemate, we're in lockdown, we cannot move forward with Brexit, we cannot move forward with anything else. And that is not good for the country, it's not good for the businesses in our country who are fed up with the uncertainty and the challenges that they are facing and want to know what the way forward is. And it is not good for our democracy, the current state of this House. But there is another reason why I believe it is essential that we have an election as soon as possible. Because I believe that in the eyes of many voters across this country, this House has lost all legitimacy to sit. It has lost the trust of the British people that they invested in it in 2017. And that is because, shall we start with the Liberal Democrats? I note what the Right Honourable Lady said about an election manifesto for a second referendum. And I know the Liberal Democrats only have a passing acquaintance with keeping manifesto promises, but at least half of the members of the Liberal Democrats who currently sit in this House were elected on a manifesto to respect the referendum and deliver Brexit, and they have switched parties without any reference to their constituents. Their constituents voted for an MP to represent them as a member of a party to deliver Brexit. And those constituents have had no say. They have not been consulted in the change of position that those MPs now had. I will happily give way.
My honourable friend share my concern that many young people were duped on tuition fees. And then the horse trading went on in coalition. There was no straight answer about who they would prop up in the next coalition. They are milking that 16 and 17-year-old vote because they're promising a future, one that they don't necessarily intend to deliver, like they never delivered on tuition fees. They traded it away.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. I agree with her wholeheartedly. And I would also add that I don't believe it's the case that Liberal Democrats have always held the position of wanting a second referendum, because I distinctly remember after the referendum in 2016, Liberal Democrat after Liberal Democrat coming on the media and saying we must respect the outcome of the referendum, we must deliver this outcome. And so I don't believe it's always been their position. But what I would also say, Mr. Speaker, is that just under 600 members of this House were elected in 2017 on a clear commitment to respect the referendum and deliver Brexit. And it is a sad reflection on our democracy and on politics in this country today that as we sit tonight, as far as I can make out, there are only about 300 members of this House who are committed to that end. Over half of the MPs who were elected to deliver on the referendum have reneged on that promise since the 2017 general election. This House does not reflect any longer what people voted for in 2017. People voted for something they thought they were going to get, and as it stands right now, they're not getting what they voted for, and I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. When he said the sad state of democracy in our country, then when we go around the world and say United Kingdom stands for respecting democracy and rule of law, then they say to us, well, you had a referendum in your country where the majority of the people wanted to leave and your parliament will not deliver that. So quite clearly not being able to deliver on that result quite clearly shows that it weakens our position around the world for pushing for democracy.
I'm very grateful, and my honourable friend makes a very good point, of which I know he has a great deal of experience and knowledge. The eyes of the world are looking on this place and seeing if we will be true to what we said we would do, that if we would respect what the voters told us to do. And I will give way to my friends.
Grateful. He talks about members of Parliament being elected at the last election on a promise of delivering Brexit and reneging on that promise. When the withdrawal agreement bill came before its second reading, did he notice that 217 Labour MPs voted against the second reading? Had they voted for it, they could have then amended it in the way that they wished to see it going, but they actually voted to stop Brexit.
And my honourable friend again makes a very good point. And I would say to the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, that if he wants to take no deal off the table, there are two very simple ways to do that. Either vote for a deal and let's secure a smooth exit from the European Union, or vote for a general election, and if he wins it, he can then take no deal off the table. And the fact that he won't support a general election, I believe, betrays the real reason why Labour won't support an election. It's because they're afraid of the British people, they're afraid of what voters will vote for, they're afraid they will lose seats and we will be in government. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say I will be supporting this motion tonight, because I believe, sadly, that this House has lost all legitimacy. We have lost the trust of the British people, and the only way to recover that is to have an election, for this House to be dissolved as soon as possible, to have an election and let the British people elect a parliament that they can trust to represent them.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has claimed that anyone who does not support his demand for an early election is, first of all, trying to stop Brexit, and secondly, is running scared of the electorate. Can I say, Mr. Speaker, we will not be supporting this motion tonight, but not because we are scared of the electorate. In fact, I can tell you the electorate, the Unionist electorate in Northern Ireland, are so angry, so despairing, so bewildered at the way in which the Prime Minister has broken his promises to the people of Northern Ireland that they would return 100 DUP MPs if they had the option. So we're not scared of a general election. And secondly, we are not trying to stop Brexit. In fact, we have been pilloried in this House because we have been seen to be some of the most determined people to deliver Brexit. But the Brexit that we have on offer is not a Brexit for the United Kingdom. It's a Brexit for part of the United Kingdom. It leaves Northern Ireland still within the single market. It leaves Northern Ireland still under the customs code of the EU. It means that any goods coming into Northern Ireland from GB will be subject to customs checks, to customs declarations, to tariffs. It means that when we send goods to another part of our own country, we've got to sign export declarations, all of which add costs and delays to the economy of Northern Ireland, and will put a huge imposition on small firms, thousands of small firms that currently trade freely with the rest of the United Kingdom, and suddenly will find themselves having to treat the country to which they belong as a third country when it comes to trade. And despite what the Prime Minister has said, the withdrawal agreement makes it quite clear that we will not be able to take part in trade deals which our country does with other parts of the world. If they go against the protocols of within the agreement, I'll give way. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree that the issues between the additional bureaucracy for business between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and Northern Ireland is all the more stark when you look at the statistics which show that Northern Ireland trades more with Great Britain than with the Republic of Ireland, the European Union and the rest of the world put together? So to put a barrier to our biggest market by far is hugely significant for the economy of Northern Ireland.
And the member's right, and sometimes statistics can go over the top of people's heads. But let's also bear in mind that it goes totally against the promises that were made by both the former Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister, that there be no impediments of trade between our part of the United Kingdom and GB, and also that there would be no danger of the Union being imperilled. And I will give way, yes.
Would the honourable gentleman accept that this dreadful border down the Irish Sea would be avoided if the whole of the United Kingdom left the customs union and left the single market, which I think his party has always supported? But now the Prime Minister has gone back on that and abandoned that, would his party be prepared to accept the entire of the United Kingdom during the transition period, staying in the customs union and staying in the single market, leaving the whole thing to be negotiated over the next 2 or 3 years during the transition period? That would rescue Ulster from this absurd position which is proposed, putting these barriers between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
Of course, the member will know that it's only half of the answer, because we're still left under this agreement within the rules of the single market, still subject to the European Court of Justice making adjudication about whether or not we have adhered to those rules, and still subject to the EU being able to deny the United Kingdom government in imposing changes which are made in the law here in Westminster to Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, there are very good reasons why we oppose this deal. And the motion before us tonight does not offer any hope of any change. In fact, if anything, it's the Prime Minister is quite openly saying, and by the way, I now want Democratic Unionist Party MPs to vote for the accelerated passage of the bill which would facilitate this agreement, which would have such detrimental effects on Northern Ireland. We don't want to have accelerated passage. We don't want to have 24-hour scrutiny. We want to make sure that there is nothing happens in this House which enables the Prime Minister to deliver on a deal which he promised he would never ever do.
That's what he said.
And the second thing, of course, is that if he gets this general election, as he made clear to my honourable friend from North Antrim, what platform will he be standing on? What mandate will he be seeking? What strategy will he be putting forward in that election? What will be in his manifesto? That he wants to come back here with a majority to deliver the death deal to the Union in Northern Ireland. Now, that's an offer. Accelerated passage of a bill which would facilitate this agreement, and an election which the Prime Minister would use to justify breaking his promises to the people of Northern Ireland. That's an offer which we can refuse, and will be quite happy to refuse. Because whilst we want to see Brexit delivered, we want to see it delivered for the whole of the United Kingdom. We want to see it delivered in the form that the Prime Minister 3 times, or well, twice, because he changed his mind a 3rd time, but twice voted for in this House. And we will not be prepared to facilitate him moving the goalposts affecting Northern Ireland this way. And for that reason, whilst we do not fear a general election, whilst we want to see Brexit delivered, if it's not going to be delivered for the whole of the United Kingdom, then I don't think that anyone in this House could possibly condemn us for standing up for our constituents who will be damaged economically, our constituents who will be damaged constitutionally. I'll give way, yes.
I'm very grateful. The honourable gentleman has been extremely generous. Can I just put it to him that if we were to have a general election, that would simply be a de facto referendum part 2, because there would be no other subject under debate during that general election but this issue of Brexit. And would that not be an absolute dereliction of our duty were we to allow something as important as a general election to be hijacked and simply be a weak ersatz version of another referendum?
Well, of course, the member's trying to draw me then, of course, that this should be decided by a second referendum. I don't believe it should be decided by a second referendum because of course, the first referendum has not been delivered on. And we want to see the first referendum delivered on. We want to see it delivered for the United Kingdom as a whole. One last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker. Well, just let me make this point first of all, and then I'll give way. One last point I want to make. The argument has been put forward here tonight that we need a general election because this has now become a zombie parliament. The government can't get any business through. We are not wreckers. We do not want to see the United Kingdom ungovernable. And indeed, the reason why we voted with the government in the Queen's speech last week was because we wanted to see that the government had a programme to get through. We wanted to give that support. Yeah. We do not want to see the United Kingdom made ungovernable. Yeah. But the one thing we're not prepared to do is to see the United Kingdom divided, to see the Union destroyed. And that's why we cannot take part in or give support to this vote tonight. And I'll give way to...
Would it be a way through if the government went to Brussels now and said they would like to initiate free trade talks immediately so that we could leave with no tariffs and new barriers if they agreed to such talks, rather than signing the withdrawal agreement?
You know, this is one of the suggestions that the Prime Minister... I know we're wandering a bit from the motion here, Mr. Speaker. I hope you'll allow me, indulge me, just to answer the point. This is one of the arguments that the Prime Minister has put forward, that surely all of this will just disappear if and when we have a free trade arrangement. But the withdrawal agreement makes it very clear under an article, I think it's Article 15 and 8, 13.8, that even with a free trade arrangement, that there is still, and this would have to be agreed with the EU, so they have a veto, so much for the claim that we've got sovereignty back, that the EU could have a free trade arrangement which would still leave Northern Ireland fully or in part within the protocols in the agreement. So whilst I would love to think that would be a way out, and we'd love to see that would be a way out, unfortunately the agreement which the Prime Minister has signed does not allow it to be a way out. Yet another reason why we've got to get this right, and yet another reason why we don't believe that debating, scrutinising, accelerating the passage of this bill through the House and then a general election to get a mandate to implement it is correct. And I'm finished now. Thank you.
The honourable gentleman has completed his speech. Mr. Nigel Evans.
Mr. Speaker, I only want to speak briefly on this matter because it's an Alice in Wonderland politics that we find ourselves in today. I'm in my 28th year in Parliament and I've never seen anything so incredible as I have since the British people voted in 2016 to leave the European Union. We gave them that contract, and I know that Project Fear didn't quite work, and they didn't quite weren't scared enough to vote to remain in. They actually said no. We've heard what everybody has said is going to happen, that the sky would fall in, but we're still prepared to vote to leave the European Union, because I think in many cases they just didn't simply believe some of the scare stories that they were told. Of course I'd give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman so much for giving way. Does he agree with me? It's not just people that voted to leave, but people like me who voted to remain, who want this done, as he said it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I've just done a 2-day tour around my constituency last Friday and Saturday, and I spoke to a number of people. There were 3 hardcore Remainers who would almost do anything to remain in the European Union. But the vast majority of people who come up to me in the Ribble Valley say, I either voted leave, get on with it, and they're quite angry, actually, quite angry that we haven't left the European Union yet. And then there are others who say, I voted remain, but I can't believe that we're still in the European Union. I'm a Democrat. I actually believe in democracy. And when we have a referendum, we actually believe in carrying out the wishes of that referendum. And we all remember what was written on the back of that pamphlet. It said that we would follow the instructions of the British people in that referendum. And even better than that, of course, is we had a general election in 2017. And in that general election, we said that we would deliver Brexit. The Labour Party stood in that general election and said they would deliver Brexit. But what do we find? Ever since that general election, we have seen dither and delay, anything but vote for the Brexit that they promised. It was either not the right deal or we've got to have no deal taken off the table. Well, we had an opportunity last week to take no deal off the table. And that was the possibility that the Labour Party could have actually fulfilled their promise of that general election 2 years ago and voted for the deal that the Prime Minister brought back from Brussels. But no. The vast majority of the Labour MPs voted against second reading. And what that meant was they didn't want it to go any further. There was no possibility of them amending that legislation to have a customs union, to get workers' rights, to get higher environmental standards. No, they decided they wanted to stop Brexit in its tracks. And that's why they voted against the second reading. At least only 19 of them voted to give it a second reading. And I would say that in my constituency in the Ribble Valley, it's in the heart of Lancashire. In fact, by an OS map, one of my villages is actually in the very centre of the United Kingdom. My constituency voted 57% to leave the European Union. Every constituency in Lancashire, whether they have a Labour MP or a Conservative MP, gratefully we don't have any Lib Dems in Lancashire, they all voted to leave the European Union. And so what I would say is that what we are doing tonight, and it's quite remarkable, the Labour Party said that they would deliver Brexit, and now they clearly are not doing that. They then said that they wanted more time to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill, even though the vast majority of them voted against it going any further. They wanted more time. And so tonight, we're offering them more time. They then say they want an early general election. Well, the way they get an early general election is by voting for the motion tonight. They get more time to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill, so at least they'll fulfil part of their promise 2 years ago, and then they'll get their early general election on December the 12th, whereby then they can put forward the programme that they wish and see where the people go. On the other hand, we've got the Scot Nats, who basically, at least are saying December the 9th. They don't want to deliver Brexit, they never have, but nonetheless, they're being consistent on that. All I would say to them, and we hear time and time again that Scotland voted not to leave the European Union. More than 1 million Scots voted to leave the European Union. There's no reaching out to those million Scots. More people voted to leave the European Union in Scotland than voted for the Scottish National Party. And so we'll see where that goes there. And then the Lib Dems, they just want to revoke Article 50. That's all they want to do, revoke Article 50. They're called the Liberal Democrats. I don't know which aspect of the Liberal Democrats are democratic, because we had a referendum, the people said they wanted to leave, and that's not being fulfilled. I'll give way to my right speaker.
I thank my honourable friend. As far as I understand it, the right honourable lady, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, did say that if we had a second referendum, she might not agree with its result, and I wonder whether that's true.
That was a previous position, but we're in an even more bizarre position with the Labour Party, because they say if they win the election, they will go to Brussels, renegotiate Brexit, then put that to the British people in a second referendum and campaign against the deal they just negotiated. I mean, that is the most Alice in Wonderland politics that I have seen in 28 years, and now we have an opposition that has been calling for an early general election running scared. the last thing they want to do is face the electorate. And quite frankly, I can see why.
Mike Gates.
Mr. Speaker, we are apparently approaching the season of goodwill. And we are supposed to have Christmas parties in our primary schools, and we are all supposed to wish each other season's greetings. I do hope that people who want a season of goodwill have not been watching these exchanges today. They say that people who are turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas. That is probably true. But it's also apparent that some people have been on chicken runs from one constituency to another. And it seems to me, no, I'm standing in Ilford South. I'm not running anywhere. I'm standing for my own constituency. Thank you very much. I'll give way, yes.
I respect the honourable member. I wonder whether he was referring to former members of the independent group when he said they were on the chicken run from one constituency to another.
The people who are doing it, and perhaps who will do it, know who they are. I'm not going to name. It seems to me the only way we are going to end this rancorous, divisive politics is to be realistic. If there is a general election and a party gets a big majority by polling 35 or 40% of the vote, that will still leave a majority in this country extremely unhappy with the outcome. And given that a referendum, in my view, a misguided referendum, an advisory referendum, but nevertheless a referendum that the former Prime Minister David Cameron said would be binding, and then he made his reckless gamble and then ran away and gave his successors the mess to clear up. That referendum got us into the mess. The only way we will be able to have closure in this country is by putting a withdrawal agreement subject to a confirmatory vote by the people and legislating this time that that referendum is legally binding and unambiguously so. And I give way to the honourable member.
Well, the honourable member to give way. Isn't it somewhat ironic that we're now being offered the third general election since the referendum and no sight of a confirmatory referendum?
Absolutely right. There is a dire need for us to think about the long-term consequences. If 16 and 17-year-olds are not allowed to have the vote, that generation will be extremely unhappy for many years to come. I think we also need to look at the aspect which has not been mentioned. The DCMS Select Committee highlighted the problems we have with social media and the way in which it is involved in election campaigning. Any election that we hold in a few weeks' time will not be properly regulated and will be open to abuse. Yes, I give way to you.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I was going to raise the very point that he has just raised. And isn't it a fact that we need new legislation on both data and on electoral law to ensure that any future election is not interfered with by people who commit criminal offences?
I congratulate the honourable member on raising that. He has done a fantastic job in highlighting the issue in this House, and I wish him well for the future. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude there.
Mr. Johnny Elfie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I supported Remain in a referendum. My constituents voted to leave. My country voted to leave. The mandate and instructions that I have as a member of this House are clear. And each and every one of us have that same instruction, and we should execute it and do the right thing. It is clear. This House is at an impasse. On this side of the House, members want to get Brexit done and move forward. On that side of the House, members want to cancel Brexit and go back into the European Union. This impasse can only be solved in one way, and that is by the people in a general election to make the final determination. And that is why I will be supporting a general election tonight, and so should each and every one of us.
Order, order. Under the standing order, I must now put the question. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As ministers of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Colin Clark and David Rutley. Tellers for the noes, Bambos Charalambus and Jeff Smith.